London after midnight doesn't rest, it remembers. The streets thin out, the buses stop singing, and the underground exhales a slow metallic sigh. When the air gets cold enough, you can almost hear the city's bones, rails trembling under the weight of ghosts no one ever sees. That's what Laura Mitchell used to say, jokingly, when she caught the late train home. Until the night she stopped joking. Until the night she vanished. Laura wasn't the kind of person who believed in stories. 32 years old, pragmatic, sharp, and overworked. She was the kind who rolled her eyes at ghost tours and urban legends. She worked nights at a small printing firm near King's Cross, cleaning layouts and packaging runs for clients who never slept either. Her routine never changed. She'd finish just after midnight, grab a coffee from the kiosk, and catch the 12:05 southbound Victoria line. Same seat every night, second car from the back, window to her right. Routine made London manageable, predictable, safe. But on a Friday in late October, that rhythm broke. A printer jam cost her 15 minutes. Then a call from her manager added 5 more. By the time she locked up and stepped outside, it was past 12:30 and the fog was rolling in thick. The kind that doesn't float but crawls, hugging every lamppost, swallowing every sound. King's Cross was nearly deserted. A single bus roared by, spraying dirty water onto the curb, and a homeless man slept under the newsstand beside the ticket hall. Inside the station, the air was colder still, metallic, damp. Only one cleaner mopped the floor near the turnstiles, humming quietly to himself. Laura hurried down the escalator, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The usual crowd of stragglers was gone. Only one man stood on the opposite platform, his face hidden behind a folded newspaper. When she reached the bottom, she saw it. A train waiting on her track, doors open, engines humming softly. She frowned. The last one wasn't due for another 10 minutes. Still, the destination board read Brixton, via Victoria Line. Her route. She stepped aboard. The doors slid shut behind her without their usual chime, and the train began to move. It was quiet, too quiet. No announcement, no flicker of the LED display, no hum of brakes, just the slow metallic pulse of wheels on rails. Laura sat, setting her coffee down beside her, and only then noticed that the car was completely empty. Her reflection looked back at her in the dark window, pale, slightly distorted by the movement of the train. Then slowly, a second reflection appeared behind her. A man in an old dark overcoat. Bowler hat tilted low, standing perfectly still at the far end of the car. She turned. No one there. When she looked back, the reflection was gone. The train passed through a long stretch of tunnel. Outside, the walls were completely black, not even the regular track lights that flash by every few seconds. Just darkness, thick, endless. The air grew colder. She rubbed her hands together, glancing at the carriage clock. 12:47 a.m. Something about that time stuck in her mind, though she didn't know why. The train slowed. Laura looked up, expecting the next station. But what she saw made her stomach drop. The platform outside was unfamiliar. Dim yellow bulbs hanging from the ceiling, cracked tiles glistening with moisture. Walls stained dark with what looked like soot. There was no station name, just faded lettering half erased by grime. She pressed her face closer to the glass. Where the hell? The lights in the car flickered. When they steadied again, the man in the bowler hat was sitting 2 rows ahead of her, facing away, completely still. Her heart pounded. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice breaking the silence like glass. The man didn't move. "Sir, did we skip Oxford Circus?" Nothing. Then without turning, he spoke. But his voice came from the speakers overhead. "End of the line." The train screeched violently. Laura fell forward, hitting her knee. Sparks burst along the tunnel wall, lighting it up for an instant, and she saw faces outside. Hundreds of them, pressing against the glass, pale and silent, their mouths open in soundless screams. The train stopped. The doors opened. Beyond them, an old forgotten platform. Laura stumbled out, coughing. The air tasted of dust and burned metal. A sign on the wall, barely readable through grime, said, "King's Cross, 1952. She blinked. That can't be right. The air was so still that her breath hung like smoke. Every sound felt muffled, as though buried under ash. She turned back toward the train. But it was gone. The tunnel stretched ahead, swallowed by shadow. In the distance, she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing off the tiles. "Hello?" she called, forcing her voice not to shake. A light flickered. A lantern's glow. An old-fashioned station worker stepped into view. Uniform pressed, cap tilted slightly forward. Relief flooded her. "Thank God, please, can you tell me how to get back?" The man raised his lantern. His face was gray, hollow, eyes sunk deep. Ash dusted his shoulders. He opened his mouth and a rasping voice came out, words barely holding shape. "You shouldn't be here, not after the fire." "The fire," Laura whispered. He nodded slowly. "We never left." The air thickened. A faint orange glow crawled along the tunnel walls. Then came the smell, sharp, acrid, unmistakable. Smoke. The platform trembled. From somewhere deep in the dark, a low roar built, growing louder, closer, like a storm made of screams. The lantern flickered violently. The worker turned toward the noise. "Train's coming," he murmured. Laura squinted down the track. A blinding white light was rushing toward her. Too fast, too bright. But there was no sound of wheels. No rails vibrating, just light swallowing everything. She threw her arms over her face. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the modern train. Clean walls, fluorescent lights, passengers chatting, scrolling through their phones. The PA crackled. "This is King's Cross, please mind the gap." Laura sat frozen, shaking. Her watch read 12:47 a.m. Again, she grabbed her bag and stumbled out, barely aware of the crowd around her. At the escalator, she looked back and saw the man in the bowler hat step off the same train. This time he was smiling. 2 weeks later, Laura's employer reported her missing. Her flat was found locked from the inside, her belongings untouched. On the wall above her desk was a photograph, an old black and white print of King's Cross Station before its renovation. In the background stood a man in a bowler hat, half turned toward the camera. The date on the back read October 23, 1987, the night of the King's Cross fire. Since then, passengers and staff have whispered about the extra train that sometimes appears after hours. Unlisted, unannounced, headlights dim, doors open. They say it only comes once every few months, and only one person ever boards. Those who see it swear they hear a voice in the tunnel before it arrives. A calm, distorted announcement repeating over and over. "End of the line! End of the line!" No driver. No passengers. Just a single shadow in a bowler hat, sitting by the window, waiting. So if you ever find yourself at King's Cross after the last scheduled train, and a carriage appears where none should be, don't get on. Even if it's your route, even if the board says Brixton. Because not every train takes you home. Some take you back to the night the tunnels caught fire, and some passengers never got off. London's history doesn't just live in books. It hides in its bricks. Old streets curve like scars, names fade, and houses remember what we try to forget. And on a narrow street tucked between Holborn and Clerkenwell lies Wycliffe Lane, a place so quiet you'd think the city itself avoids it. Locals call it the lane that listens, and the house at the end, number 93, has been empty for nearly 70 years. But that wasn't always the case. Once, a woman named Clara Vaughn lived there, and if the rumors are true, she never really left. Clara wasn't easily frightened. She was a historian for the London Heritage Society, calm, methodical, a skeptic by nature. When she inherited the property from her late great-aunt Margaret, she saw opportunity, not danger. A Victorian townhouse in need of love, perfect for renovation, resale, or maybe even a quiet life away from the chaos of London. But on the night she first arrived, the fog was thick as soup, and the street lamps flickered like dying candles. Her Uber driver refused to go past the third house, muttering something about strange echoes at the end of the lane. She laughed it off, but later, she'd remember the way his hands trembled when he said it. The house itself looked ancient. Blackened brick, ivy crawling up to the roof, and windows so clouded you couldn't see inside. As she pushed open the creaky door, a wave of cold air hit her, the kind that smells faintly of metal and dust. The air was stale, heavy, yet the fireplace still held ashes, and on the mantel sat a family photograph covered in grime. A couple stood smiling beside a little girl with dark curls and a porcelain doll in her hands. Someone had scratched the child's face out of the photo. The first few nights were normal. The heating worked. The lights flickered sometimes, but it was an old house. She expected that. Until the fourth night. She was working in the study when she heard something upstairs. A soft rhythmic tapping, like footsteps. She froze, listening. The sound paused too, as if waiting for her reaction. Then after a few seconds, it began again. When she climbed the stairs, she saw the hallway light swinging slightly, casting long, warped shadows on the wallpaper. At the end of the hall was a door she didn't remember seeing before. It was narrow, with chipped white paint and no handle, just a single old-fashioned keyhole. When she crouched to look through it, she saw only darkness, but she could hear breathing on the other side. That night, Clara had a dream. She stood in the same hallway, fog seeping through the cracks in the walls, and a small girl stood facing that hidden door. The girl turned to her and whispered, trembling, "Don't open it again, Miss Vaughn." Clara woke, gasping for air. The house was silent, except for the clock in the hallway, ticking at exactly 3:12 a.m. The next morning, she decided to learn more about the property. At the local records office, the clerk looked uneasy when she gave the address. He pulled out an old file, thick with dust, and flipped through pages of yellowed documents. "Ah, number 93 Wycliffe Lane," he said quietly. "That house was owned by the Rutherfords back in the 1880s, one of London's wealthier families." "What happened to them?" Clara asked. He hesitated. "Fire. Started in the nursery. The parents escaped, but the little girl didn't." The clerk looked at her over his glasses. "They say her body was never found, only her doll." That night, Clara couldn't stop thinking about it. She went back upstairs, moved the cabinet blocking that strange door, and found it slightly open. A cold draft blew through, carrying a faint smell of burnt wood and lavender. Her phone's flashlight trembled in her hand as she looked down the stairs. Each step creaked louder than the last. The air grew colder, her breath fogged. At the bottom, she found a small stone cellar, and in the corner, half covered in ash, was an iron cradle. Inside it, a porcelain doll with cracked skin and melted eyes. She knelt down, and the doll's mouth moved. You opened it again. The light went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Clara could hear soft footsteps circling her, too small to be adult. Then a child's laughter echoed against the walls. She ran up the stairs, slamming the door shut, but she could still hear scratching from the other side, as if small hands were trying to claw their way out. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the scratching stopped. By morning, the door was closed again. She packed her bag and decided to leave. When her cab arrived, the driver looked confused when she gave him the address. "Wycliffe Lane," he said. "You sure? That part's been gone for decades." Clara frowned. "What do you mean, gone?" He pointed ahead. Through the fog, she saw it. An empty lot surrounded by fencing. No house, no street signs, just rubble and weeds. And yet, she could still see the faint outline of number 93's windows shimmering through the fog, like a reflection of something that shouldn't exist. She stepped out of the cab, her phone vibrating with a notification. A new audio recording had appeared, time-stamped 3:12 a.m. She played it. A little girl's voice sang softly, "Sleep, little one, in the house of flame. Mother's watching. She knows your name." Then a pause and a whisper directly into the mic. "You let me out." Clara Vaughn disappeared that day. Police found her suitcase near the old lot. Her wallet and phone beside it, screen still unlocked. And on the phone's background image, someone had replaced her wallpaper with an old photograph. The Rutherford family, the same one she saw in the house. Only this time, the scratched-out face of the girl had been restored, and the girl was smiling. Some nights, neighbors still report hearing faint humming from the empty lot. And on foggy evenings, a dim light appears where the old window once stood. If you ever find yourself walking down Wycliffe Lane and feel the urge to look back, don't, because they say the house listens, and once it hears your name, it never forgets. Camden Town sleeps differently from the rest of London. When the bars close and the crowds fade, the fog rolls in off the canal, slow, heavy, and cold. It muffles sound, hides faces, and carries whispers that don't belong to the living. That's when the ticking starts. Not from watches or tower clocks, but from a single boarded-up shop on the corner of an old street. A place most Londoners cross the road to avoid. The faded sign above the door still reads, "Hollingsworth and Son, Clockmakers since 1842. And though no one has worked there in decades, locals say you can still hear the sound of gears turning inside." Counting backward, in the 1930s, Arthur Hollingsworth was one of London's finest craftsmen. He built clocks for railway stations, embassies, even the royal court. His hands were steady, his mind precise, obsessed with one question: could time move in reverse? He wrote about temporal recoil, chronometric symmetry, and other theories too strange for his peers. Neighbors often heard hammering at odd hours, saw strange blue sparks in his upper windows. Only his 12-year-old son, Edward, was ever seen entering or leaving. And then one freezing December night in 1936, every clock in Camden stopped at exactly 12:13 a.m. The next morning, the shop was locked from within. Arthur and Edward were gone. 80 years later, a young clock restorer named Daniel Carr bought the building at auction. He wasn't superstitious, just practical. He thought the place had character, a perfect home for his antique restoration business. But on his first night there, he noticed something strange. The air inside was colder than outside. Every step echoed twice. And when he dusted off the counter, he found a tarnished brass plaque engraved with two words: Tempus revertit, time returns. That evening, Daniel stayed late, testing the clocks that still lined the walls. One by one, he wound them carefully, listening to the satisfying tick of each mechanism. But at 11:52 p.m., one clock began to tick backward. Then another. And another. Within seconds, every clock in the shop was running in reverse. Their hands spinning counterclockwise, gears rattling like bones. The air grew thick, heavy, electric, and then silence. Every clock froze at 12:13 a.m. The next day, Daniel discovered a note tucked beneath the counter, written in elegant fountain pen. To stop the ticking winded no more. No name, no date, He laughed it off, assuming it was a prank from some previous tenant. But curiosity got the better of him. That night, he went upstairs to the old workshop. The attic was a maze of brass gears, sketches, and unfinished pieces, all layered in decades of dust. In the center stood a massive grandfather clock unlike any he'd ever seen. A masterpiece of dark walnut and blackened brass, with intricate carvings and a cracked glass face. Across the rim were the same Latin words, Tempus Revertit. The pendulum hung motionless, shaped like a crescent blade. Daniel grinned and gave the chain a gentle pull. The pendulum moved once, twice, then began swinging on its own. Tick, tock, tick, then backwards. The lights flickered. A deep metallic groan rolled through the building. The ticking grew louder, overlapping, echoing from the walls. Daniel staggered back as the air shimmered, bending like heat over metal. When the light steadied, the workshop looked different. The bulbs were gone, replaced by dim oil lamps. The tools were older. And outside the window, the street wasn't modern Camden anymore. Horse carts clattered below. Gas lamps flickered through fog. And standing in the street was a man in a soot-stained apron. Face pale, eyes hollow. Arthur Hollingsworth. Daniel's chest tightened. He rushed downstairs to the door, but it wouldn't open. He shouted, banged, kicked, nothing. Then came the sound. Every clock in the shop ticking again, faster, in perfect unison. He turned and saw a boy standing behind the counter. Edward. The child's lips didn't move, but a voice echoed softly in Daniel's head. He made it work, but it won't stop. The air hummed. The workshop above began to glow with faint golden light seeping through the floorboards. Gears turned by themselves. Shadows stretched along the walls like living things. Then came a final thunderous chime. 13 strikes. The sound tore through the air, shaking every glass face, every gear, every window pane. And in that moment, Daniel saw dozens of shapes flicker into existence. Gray, motionless figures filling the shop, each with hollow eyes and watches fused to their wrists, spinning backward. Arthur's voice echoed again. Time doesn't forgive, it collects. When the light faded, the clocks all stopped. The shop was silent once more. Days later, police broke in after neighbors complained of a constant ticking sound. They found the building empty, no Daniel, no trace of his equipment. Every clock in the shop was frozen at 12:13 a.m. On the counter lay a freshly engraved brass plate. To stop the ticking, wind it no more. And in the shop window, a faint reflection. A young man's face staring out through the glass, eyes wide and unblinking. The Hollingsworth shop still stands today. Its door is sealed, its sign barely legible. But if you ever walk through Camden after midnight and hear faint ticking through the fog, don't stop. Don't look in the window. Because every few decades, the clock wakes again. And when it does, someone always disappears, just long enough to wind it one more time. London has thousands of hotels, grand, modest, and forgotten. But among them all, there's one most Londoners never mention by name. Not because it's cursed, but because it pretends not to exist. A narrow Victorian structure on the Strand, squeezed between two taller buildings, its sign faded to rust. If you walk by too fast, you'll miss it completely. The Wellington Arms Hotel. It's been operating since 1889. Same brass keys, same marble counter, same strange habit of never renting out one particular room. Room 313. In 2021, an American journalist named Eleanor Briggs checked in for a week. She was in London to research a piece on haunted accommodations, tourist traps, ghost tours, fake legends. She wanted to prove it was all clever marketing. The Wellington Arms was her final stop. She didn't know it would also be her last. From the moment she entered, the place felt paused. The lobby smelled faintly of polish and dust. A single chandelier flickered above her like a heartbeat. Behind the counter, the old night clerk looked up, adjusting his wire-frame glasses. "Evening, miss, checking in?" "Yes, Eleanor Briggs. 1 room, 7 nights." He flipped through the ledger, hesitated, then said softly, "You'll be on the 3rd floor, room 312. Eleanor smiled. "What's wrong with 313? The man froze. Then after a moment, "That room's under maintenance." His tone made her raise an eyebrow, but she didn't push. She'd heard this act before. Hotels used haunted rooms as gimmicks. Only this one seemed to be avoiding the legend, not selling it. The elevator groaned as she ascended. The hallway lights buzzed with that dull orange glow unique to London's older hotels. Warm, but uneasy. Her room was neat and dated. Floral wallpaper, brass bed frame, a large antique mirror. But what caught her eye immediately was the door across the hall. Room 313. Locked, unmarked, and covered in a fine layer of dust. At exactly midnight, Eleanor began her notes. She recorded every sound, temperature drop, and flicker for her article. At 12:42, she heard something. A soft knocking from across the hall. 3 taps. Pause. 3 again. She opened the door, but the hallway was empty. Still, she wrote it down. Possible plumbing noise or heat pipe expansion. But when she closed her door, she noticed something new. Her key, hanging by the chain inside the lock, was gently turning on its own. The next day, she asked the clerk again, "What's the story with 313? He stared at her. "I wouldn't trouble yourself with that, miss." "Why not?" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Because the last guest who stayed there has never checked out." She laughed nervously. "Let me guess, 100 years ago? Lightning, tragic love affair?" He didn't smile. "No, miss, 6 months ago." Eleanor's curiosity turned professional. She contacted a friend at the London Archives. Within hours, she had her name, Margaret Holloway, a novelist who'd rented the room for 2 nights last December. She'd been found dead in the bathtub. The cause? Drowning. No water, no signs of struggle. That night, Eleanor sat by the window, listening. At 12:43 a.m., the knocking began again. 3 taps. Silence. 3 taps. She recorded it this time. When she played the audio back, there was something else beneath the knocks. A faint voice whispering in the static. "Let me in." She froze. Paused the recording. Replayed it. The same voice, quite desperate female. That was the first night she saw the figure. In the mirror's reflection, behind her shoulder, a pale woman stood in the doorway, soaked hair, gray lips, wide, unblinking eyes. But when Eleanor spun around, the room was empty. The only trace was water, faint droplets leading to the hall. The next morning, Eleanor demanded to see room 313. The clerk refused. "Please, miss, it's not for guests." "I'm not a guest anymore," she said. "I'm writing an article." He shook his head. "You'll regret it." But when he stepped away to answer a ringing phone, she slipped the spare key from the rack and made her way upstairs. The door opened with a long, reluctant creak. Dust danced in the thin light spilling from the corridor. Inside, room 313 was nearly identical to hers. Same furniture, same wallpaper, but colder. And in the center of the floor, faint water stains formed a perfect circle. Her camera began to glitch, the image pulsing with static. She raised her flashlight and saw words carved faintly into the wall above the bathtub. "She never left." The air thickened. Behind her, the door clicked shut. She turned, heart hammering, and saw her reflection in the mirror. But it wasn't following her movements. The reflection smiled. Its eyes turned milky white, and water began pouring down the mirror's surface like rain. Her phone recorded only static and the same voice repeating over and over. "Let me in." When the clerk found her the next morning, room 313 was locked again from the inside. No sign of forced entry, no broken glass. Just water pooled on the floor, dripping through the ceiling below. Eleanor's room was empty. Her luggage was still there, but her notebook, gone. All that remained was her phone. Screen frozen at 12:43 a.m., playing that same distorted whisper. "Let me in." The Wellington Arms still operates quietly under the same name. They rent every room except 313. Some nights, guests in 312 claim they hear knocking from across the hall. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. If anyone opens their door, the hallway is always empty. But the carpet is wet, and a faint reflection shimmers in the brass number plate, smiling back. So if you ever stay near the Strand and the clerk gives you your key, check the number carefully. If it ends in 13, ask for another. Because at the Wellington Arms, some guests still check in. They just never leave. There's something strange about London's bridges. No matter how loud the city gets, the Thames always hums below them, slow, endless, whispering to itself. People say that when the fog rolls thick over the river, you can hear more than just the water moving. Sometimes you can hear voices, especially near Blackfriars Bridge. It's a place with history, Roman graves beneath, suicides above, and a current that's pulled down more than just driftwood. And if you believe the stories, one night, it pulled down something that shouldn't have come back. In 2016, a night shift engineer named Michael Rowe worked maintenance on the underground line that runs near the bridge. He'd been on the job nearly 10 years. Quiet, careful, the kind of man who never believed in anything he couldn't measure. That's why the first time he heard it, he tried to explain it away. It was a sound, faint, rhythmic, echoing through the maintenance tunnel that followed the riverbank. At first, he thought it was water hammering through a pipe, but it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from below. That week, London was drowning in fog. The kind that turns the Thames into a sheet of gray glass and makes every streetlight look like it's floating in milk. Michael's team had finished early that night, and he decided to stay behind, checking sensors near the old drainage conduit under Blackfriars. He descended alone. Metal stairs slick with condensation, the air smelling of iron and wet stone. At the lowest level, he heard it again. 3 soft knocks. Pause. 3 more. Like someone knocking from beneath the floor. He crouched, pressing his flashlight to the concrete. It was vibrating. Something or someone was tapping from the other side. He radioed his supervisor. "John, you hearing this?" Static. Then faintly. "Already topside, Mike. Don't stay down too long. The fog's thick tonight." The radio cut. When Michael stood up, the knocking had stopped. He exhaled, half laughing at himself, and started toward the stairs. Then behind him, a faint voice. "Help me." He froze. It came again, softer this time, from the direction of the river wall. "Please, help me." He turned his flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught the outline of a narrow drainage grate, half submerged in murky water. Behind it, movement. A pale hand pressed briefly against the metal, then vanished beneath the surface. Michael stumbled back, heart pounding. He splashed toward the grate and shone the light in again. Nothing but swirling water and darkness. He forced a shaky laugh. "Great, Mike, you're talking to drains now." But as he turned to leave, a wet footprint appeared on the floor. Then another. Leading toward him, he ran. The tunnel echoed with splashes behind him, uneven, dragging steps. When he reached the stairs, his flashlight died. He climbed in darkness, 2 steps at a time, until he burst through the door at the surface. The fog outside was so thick he could barely see the bridge. Everything was quiet. No traffic, no people, just the sound of the river breathing below. Then he heard it again. "Help me!" Only now it came from above. He looked up. A figure stood on the bridge's edge, barely visible through the fog. He ran toward it, waving his arms. "Hey, step back, it's not safe!" But the closer he got, the clearer it became. The figure wasn't standing. It was hanging, suspended just inches above the water, its clothes dripping, head tilted back. The body twisted slowly toward him, and he saw its face. Pale, waterlogged, eyes open. It was him. Michael fell backward, gasping. The reflection vanished, replaced by empty fog. He stumbled toward the embankment lights, his breath ragged, and found himself standing alone beneath the bridge. The next morning, when his team arrived, they found his equipment bag neatly placed beside the tunnel entrance. His ID badge was still clipped to the strap, his boots lined up perfectly next to it. Michael Rowe was never seen again. 2 days later, a police diver searching the river for unrelated debris found something buried in the silt. A small brass pocket watch still ticking. On the back, engraved words, "To stop the knocking, don't answer." The watch was traced to an unknown maker. Its design matched none in record, except one found years earlier in the personal effects of an engineer who drowned under the same bridge in 1901. Today, the bridge stands as solid as ever. But every few years, when the fog rolls in heavy and the Thames hides its reflection, someone walking across stops suddenly, looks down over the edge, and claims they see a man standing below, waist deep in the water, staring upward, holding a small brass watch in his hand. Sometimes he calls out, sometimes he doesn't. But if you ever cross Blackfriars Bridge after midnight and hear 3 soft knocks echo from the river below, don't look down, because what's knocking might be you. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.